They say greatness is often born from the ashes of suffering, but what if the fire never stops burning before he was Malcolm X, before the world heard his thunderous voice echo across continents? He was just Malcolm Little, a child born not with a silver spoon, but into the smoke of fear, fire, and flames. Born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925, Malcolm was introduced to resistance before he could even speak. His father, Earl Little, a preacher and proud supporter of Marcus Garvey's Pan-African movement, dared to raise his voice in a land that punished black ambition. For that, his house was burned down, not once, but twice. And then one day, Earl Little's body was found lying across streetcar tracks, his skull crushed. They called it an accident, but the family knew better. The fire that took his home was now aimed at his soul. His mother, Louise, was left to raise 8 children alone, haunted by grief, crushed by racism, and eventually institutionalized. Malcolm was ripped from her arms by the state, a system that labeled him a problem child before he even had a chance to become one. He bounced from foster home to foster home, absorbing the silent lesson that the world had no place for boys like him. But here's the truth, that seed of pain was not weakness, it was a spark. Every time society tried to erase him, Malcolm carved his name into the walls of fate. Every time a door was slammed in his face, he stared into the crack and started looking for keys. From a young age, he learned that the world doesn't give you power, you take it, and if you want to matter, you have to master your mind before they do. This wasn't just survival, it was the birth of vision. In a school where he was told he could never be a lawyer because he was black, Malcolm didn't cry, he didn't beg, he remembered what it felt like to be told no. So many times the words started echoing in his bones. And deep inside that echo, a louder voice began to grow, his own. If you're listening right now and your story begins in chaos, if you've been knocked down before you've even begun, let Malcolm be your mirror. Because it's not where you start, it's what you do with the fire, and Malcolm, he didn't run from it, he became it. Malcolm didn't walk into greatness, he staggered into it. After years in foster care, drifting between homes that didn't see him and systems that didn't care, Malcolm ended up in Boston, a city with bright lights, quick money, and the illusion of freedom. For a young black man with sharp wit and sharper pain, it was intoxicating. He became Detroit red, slick suit, conch hair, hustler's stride. He ran numbers, dealt drugs, danced through the nightlife with charisma that made him unforgettable. But behind every laugh was a void. Behind every hustle was hunger, hunger for control, for identity, for power in a world that saw him as invisible unless he was in trouble. And trouble came. Arrested at just 20 years old for burglary, Malcolm was sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison. To the system, he was just another statistic, another young black man thrown into the shadows. They thought it was the end of his story, but here's where it gets interesting. Because rock bottom has a strange power. It strips away your lies, your ego, your distractions, and what's left is the truth you've been hiding from. In that prison cell, surrounded by steel and silence, Malcolm met the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered, himself. He read furiously, hungrily, the dictionary from A to Z, philosophy, history, religion, psychology. He devoured knowledge the way he once chased the streets. With obsession, every page was a battle, every book a resurrection. The hustler was dying, a thinker was being born. Prison didn't break him, it built him. You see, some people serve time, but Malcolm made time serve him. And this is where your story intersects with his. You may not be in a prison, but maybe you're stuck in debt, in trauma, in silence, in fear. Whatever your cell looks like, ask yourself, are you just surviving it, or are you using it? Because the man who entered prison as a thief would walk out as a revolutionary. And the world would never be the same again. Prison is supposed to silence you, but for Malcolm it gave him a new voice, in a 6. By 9-foot cell, where many lose themselves, Malcolm found himself. At first, he was angry at the world, at the system, at God. But anger has two paths, destruction or transformation. Malcolm chose the latter, and that choice changed everything. His transformation didn't begin with a lightning bolt. It began with a letter. His brother wrote to him about the Nation of Islam, a movement that believed the black man was not inferior, but divine. That message shook something loose in Malcolm. He began to question everything he thought he knew about race, identity, power. Slowly the conked hair faded, the hustler's strut gave way to the scholar's stride, and then came books. Malcolm didn't just read them, he absorbed them: Nietzsche, Marx, Du Bois, the Koran, the Bible. The dictionary itself, page by page, he rebuilt his vocabulary, his vision, and his value. He once said, "People don't realize how a man's whole life can be changed by one book." For Malcolm, it was dozen. In that silence, he built a mind that would later command stadiums. This is the part most people skip. They want the spotlight, but not the solitude, the power, but not the process. But Malcolm knew, if you want to speak to the world, you must first speak to yourself. So he sharpened his thoughts, mastered his emotions, understood his trauma, and when he emerged after 6 years, he wasn't just free from prison, he was free from mental chain. Malcolm once said, "I've had more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands, even if he's wrong, than one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil." That clarity, that courage, it was forged in the fire of reflection. And here's what you must ask yourself when you're alone: do you scroll, or do you build? When you're wounded, do you numb, or do you grow? Because sometimes the best version of you is waiting on the other side of isolation. Malcolm didn't leave prison with fear. He left with purpose, and purpose is the most dangerous weapon of all. When Malcolm walked out of prison in 1952, he didn't just walk into freedom, he walked into fire with a purpose. He joined the Nation of Islam, led by the enigmatic Elijah Muhammad, a movement that believed the black man was divine, the original man, the cornerstone of a future not yet realized. It wasn't just religion. It was revolution in robes and discipline in doctrine, and for Malcolm it was the structure he never had: no drugs, no alcohol, no excuses, daily prayer, sharp dress, clean living. He wore his suit like armor, spoke with military precision, and walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was. Ask yourself, what would your life look like with that kind of structure? What if your habits were sacred? What if your morning routine was your declaration of war against chaos? Malcolm was more than a follower, he was a force. He didn't just preach Islam, he became its voice. In Harlem, in Chicago, in Detroit, he stood on street corners with fire in his voice and conviction in his chest. While others whispered, Malcolm thundered, "The white man is the devil." He would say, not out of hatred, but out of historical rage, reflecting centuries of slavery, segregation, and silence. It was controversial, it was confrontational, it was magnetic, and suddenly this once forgotten ex-con was drawing thousands. The media couldn't ignore him. The FBI began watching him. Malcolm was not a man anymore. He was a movement. But here's the lesson behind the noise. What made Malcolm powerful wasn't just his words, it was his discipline, his rejection of mediocrity, his mastery of self. Because before you lead a movement, you must lead your mind. Before you challenge the world, you must challenge your reflection. And Malcolm, he turned pain into principle, hustle into honor, and identity into a shield. This chapter of his life teaches us this: if you want the world to take you seriously, start by taking yourself seriously. By the late 1950s, Malcolm X had become more than just a preacher. He was a storm with a voice like thunder. Wherever he went, crowds gathered, not for spectacle, but for truth, raw, unfiltered, unpolished. He didn't speak to comfort, he spoke to confront. With sharp intellect and sharper words, he exposed the hypocrisy of America's promises, freedom and equality for all. Unless you were black, he didn't ask for justice politely. He demanded it with a voice that couldn't be ignored. While Dr. King spoke of dreams, Malcolm spoke of reality, of broken bones and broken promises, of segregated schools and segregated souls. You don't stick a knife in a man's back 9 inches, pull it out 6, and call it progress, he declared. That line echoed like a war cry. Because for every oppressed soul in the audience, Malcolm wasn't just speaking for them. He was speaking through them, and the system, it shook. The FBI labeled him a threat. The media called him a radical. But to the young, the poor, the silenced, Malcolm was the mirror they never had. He made black beautiful. He made rage righteous. He made identity a weapon. Here's what made him dangerous. He never asked to be accepted. He dared to be respected, and that is where the lesson lies for you. In your life, are you whispering your worth, or are you speaking it with fire? Are you asking the world for a seat, or are you building your own table? Malcolm's rise wasn't because the system gave him a platform. It was because he built one brick by brick with focus, with courage, with truth, and once he had it, he used it to light the world on fire. Because when you find your voice and it's rooted in truth, not even a nation can silence you. Every movement carries within it the seeds of conflict, and for Malcolm, the storm wasn't just outside, it was growing from within. The Nation of Islam had given him direction, discipline, identity, but Malcolm was beginning to outgrow the walls that had once protected him. He saw contradictions. Leaders preaching purity but living in secret indulgence. He saw silence where truth demanded speech, and perhaps most importantly, he saw the need to evolve. When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, the nation demanded silence, but Malcolm spoke. The chickens have come home to roost, he said, not in celebration, but in critique of America's violent history. And with those words, the nation silenced him, publicly, harshly, permanently, but they didn't silence his spirit. They unleashed it. Sometimes your growth offends those who taught you how to grow. Sometimes your light exposes the shadows they hope to keep hidden, and so came the break. Malcolm left the nation, not in anger, but in purpose. He was no longer satisfied with dogma. He wanted truth, bigger truth, universal truth. This was the moment when Malcolm became not just a black nationalist, but a global human rights warrior. He changed his name again. Al-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, he traveled to Mecca. He prayed beside men of all colors. He saw that racism was not a religion, it was a system, and with that revelation, Malcolm's message evolved. I am not anti-white, I am anti-oppression, anti-exploitation, anti-ignorance. This was not betrayal. This was awakening, and this, my friend, is your lesson. Growth requires leaving comfort behind, speaking when silence is expected, questioning what once saved you. You will lose people, you will lose tribes. But if you gain your truth, you gain the only thing that can never be taken. Malcolm didn't betray the nation. He betrayed limitation, and in doing so, he became something greater than a leader. He became a liberator. In 1964, Malcolm X stepped into a new world, not in America, but in the holy city of Mecca, a journey that would change not only the man, but the mission. He had gone as Malcolm X. He returned as Al-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz. In Mecca, he prayed beside men with blonde hair and blue eyes, men who called him brother, men who shattered the lie that skin color defines the soul. This was the moment Malcolm's world exploded wide open. He saw Islam practiced not as a separatist doctrine, but as a unifying force. He realized that the struggle was not just black vs. white, but the oppressed vs. the oppressor everywhere, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America. Malcolm no longer fought for just black liberation, he fought for human liberation. He began forming international alliances. He met with African leaders, revolutionary thinkers, and activists from across the globe. He testified to the United Nations, accusing America of human rights violations. not civil rights grievances. This was no longer just civil disobedience. This was global diplomacy. This was warfare of the intellectual elite. And it scared the establishment to its core, because a Malcolm who could unify the ghetto with Ghana, a Malcolm who spoke the language of both pain and policy, that was a Malcolm they couldn't contain. And here's where you'll break through lives. Sometimes the next level of your life requires crossing oceans, mentally, spiritually, or literally. Sometimes your purpose is buried under the limits of your hometown, your circle, your belief. Malcolm's pilgrimage wasn't just to a holy land. It was a pilgrimage to perspective, to possibility, to peace, and from it he returned not softer, but sharper, wiser, more dangerous than ever, because now he didn't just speak for Harlem. He spoke for humanity. When a man finds his truth and refuses to be silent, he becomes a threat. After Mecca, Malcolm X returned home with a new vision, stronger, broader, more dangerous to the status quo. But with evolution came enemies, and not all of them were outside. He had left the nation of Islam, and in doing so, he left behind protection, loyalty, and familiarity. But worse, he had exposed their flaws. He had questioned the integrity of the very leaders who once guided him, and they were watching, steady tone at the same time the U.S. government, the FBI, the NYPD, COINTELPRO, they had never stopped watching. They didn't need to destroy him. They needed to turn people against him. He was now surrounded, followed, harassed, wiretapped, threatened. His house was firebombed while his children slept inside. This wasn't fear. This was war, but Malcolm didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood taller, even when he knew the countdown had begun. Because here's the truth. When you rise too high for comfort, when your words cut too deep, when your voice reaches too many, the system doesn't need you dead, but it can't afford you alive. And here's what you must understand. Every journey of greatness attracts two kinds of people, those who will protect your fire, and those who will try to extinguish it. You will be targeted not just by enemies, but by the shadows of your past, the fears of your present, and the betrayal of those who once walked beside you. But you don't back down, you don't quiet your truth. You keep walking through the storm with your eyes wide open, because greatness is never comfortable, it's never safe, and it's never surrounded by applause. Malcolm didn't just face death, he stared it down. Because he knew something we must all remember. You can kill a man, but you can't kill a mission. You can silence a voice, but you can't erase a truth. February 21st, 1965. The Audubon Ballroom, Harlem, New York. Malcolm X stood before a crowd of followers, men, women, children. He was there to speak, to teach, to awaken. He had been threatened. He knew the risk. He had told his wife, "I know they are going to kill me." And still he showed up. He walked onto the stage, unarmed, exposed, but unshaken, and in those final moments, as chaos erupted and bullets tore through the air, Malcolm stood. He fell not as a victim, but as a martyr. Multiple men pulled the trigger, but it wasn't just fingers that fired those shots. It was fear, it was betrayal. It was the coordinated silence of institutions that couldn't afford his voice to echo any louder. Malcolm died at just 39 years old. But in death he became immortal, because you can kill a body, you can end a speech, but you cannot erase a man who became a symbol, and here lies a deep truth. The most dangerous man in the world is not the one with a weapon, but the one with a mind free from control, a voice that can move the masses, a spirit that cannot be bought, bullied, or broken. Malcolm didn't die afraid, he died fulfilled, knowing he had found his purpose, lived it boldly, and spoke it fearlessly. And what about you? Are you living in fear of your truth? Are you shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for your voice? Because if Malcolm taught us anything, it's that one life lived with courage can ignite 1,000 more. He didn't just leave behind speeches. He left a blueprint, a path, a pulse, a call to rise. Malcolm X is gone, but his legacy, it never left the room. His voice still echoes in classrooms, in courtrooms, in communities fighting for justice. His fire still burns in the hearts of those who refuse to accept the world as it is. He didn't die for fame. He didn't rise for applause. Malcolm X lived for truth. He died for change, and now he lives through you. You may not be called to stand at a podium. You may not march, protest, or debate on national stages, but you are called to rise, to think, to act, to break the mental chains that bind you, to demand respect, not just for yourself, but for those who have none. To live a life that forces the world to pay attention, because that's what Malcolm did. He transformed hate into strength, prison into purpose, silence into speech, anger into action, and now it's your turn. When the world tells you to sit down, stand. When they say be quiet, speak. When they say this is just how things are, dare to imagine how they could be, because history doesn't just remember names, it remembers the impact they left. Malcolm left a legacy not written in ink, but etched in fire, a fire that says, by any means necessary. And so, to everyone listening, let this not be the end of a video, but the beginning of your revolution. Your thoughts, your actions, your voice, you are the ballot, you are the bullet, you are the legacy. Rise, and never apologize for being unshakably, unapologetically awake.